So why did economists not predict the financial crisis?
Because they believe that looking at the way money is created is not important.
What do you mean?
They believe that it is not important that banks create money.
What do you mean banks create money?
Money is created when we borrow from the bank.
How is that possible?
Well, they have a license to create money called a banking license.
But I thought it was illegal for any company to create money.
Not for banks.
Why not?
Because economists believe that it is okay.
Is it okay for me to create money?
No. You will go to prison.
So why is it okay for banks to create money?
It is called fractional reserve banking.
What is that?
It gives banks the ability to create money.
But why would banks be allowed to create money?
Because economists think it is okay.
Why would they think that it is okay?
Because universities told them it is okay.
So why does the government not create money?
Because if they were in charge of creating money, they would create lots of money to meet the demands of the public, to win votes. And this will cause inflation.
What is inflation?
That is when prices keep going up.
So why would politicians cause inflation if they were in charge of creating money?
Because politicians can only get votes from the public if they promise to spend lots of money.
So the government cannot be trusted to create money.
That is correct.
So they allow banks to create money instead.
That is correct.
Can banks be trusted to create money?
No. That is why we get a financial crisis.
Why?
Because they create more money by issuing more loans. And the more loans they make, the more money they make. This means they will always want to create more money.
How do they do that?
Through a process called fractional reserve banking. Just look it up in Google.
So if almost all money is created as loans, how do we repay the interest on the loans?
We cannot.
What do you mean?
The interest to repay all loans does not exist.
So how do we repay the loans?
Easy. We borrow more.
So for our system to stay alive, we have to borrow more.
That is correct.
So banks have to issue more loans in order to keep the system alive.
That is correct.
But they told us the banks are evil.
If they did not issue more debt, we would have been in a depression a long time ago. By issuing more debt, they are keeping the broken system alive. This is holding off the depression for a bit longer, whether they know it or not.
But what about all the talk on the news about reckless bankers and bonus scandals?
It is easy to get people angry at the banks. This diverts attention away from the problems in our system. It is easier to explain. Everybody wants to blame somebody. Bankers are the most obvious choice to blame because they were creating the debt and have gained the most from the system. However, most do not realize that we have to create debt to keep the system alive. And they have kept the system alive a little bit longer.
So how do we borrow more to keep the system alive?
That is easy. We take out more credit cards. We take on more mortgages. Our children take on more student loans. And companies borrow more.
So we have not overspent like everybody is telling us. We are simply keeping the system alive.
All the debt kept the system alive and prevented the depression. No spending on debt. No money. This is how the system works.
But what happens when we have to repay those loans?
We borrow more because our system has more debt than money. The money to repay does not exist. So we must borrow more.
Does this not mean we have to borrow more forever, just to pay the interest?
That is correct.
So if we don't take on more debt, what happens?
Then we don't have the money to pay the debt.
So, then what?
We declare bankruptcy.
But when we go bankrupt, does that not mean money disappears from our system?
That is correct.
So how do we survive when money is disappearing?
We do not. We go into a depression.
What if we don't want to go into a depression?
Simple. The government borrows the money for us instead.
Why would the government borrow the money?
Because the majority of people are too broke to take on any more debt. And the majority of businesses are too busy trying to repay their old debt. They cannot take on any more debt. Somebody has to borrow more, or the system collapses. So the government steps in and borrows the money. Remember, if there is no debt, there is no money. And government debt increases forever despite the fact that they think they are trying to pay it off.
What happens when the government borrows more?
Banks lend more money and things eventually go back to normal.
But we are still in debt.
That is correct.
And businesses are in debt?
That is correct.
And the government is in debt.
That is correct.
What happens when the government tries to repay the debt?
They increase taxes and borrow more. They pay some of the interest with the new additional tax income. They pay most of the interest with more debt. It is called a Ponzi scheme.
But how can the taxpayer pay the extra tax when we were too broke to repay our debt in the first place?
We cannot.
So what happens next?
The government borrows more for us instead.
What happens to the government debt?
It increases forever.
What happens when the government can no longer pay the interest on the debt?
Then the government can borrow it from the central bank
How?
through quantitative easing.
So the government borrows it from the central bank.
That is correct.
Where do they get it from?
Simple. They create it.
How do they create it?
They just create it in a computer.
Then what?
The government needs to repay it plus the interest.
But the money to repay all the debt back plus the interest does not exist.
That is correct, so the next step is to increase taxes.
Forever? But then we go deeper into debt?
Correct, that is what economists call economic growth.
So what happens if the government cuts back and stops spending?
Then the economy goes into a depression. We get angry at the politicians. We blame whoever the current political party is. We then vote to change political leadership. The politicians then get angry at the bankers. The bankers take a bonus and resign. We then blame the regulators for letting it happen. The regulators then debate about how to patch up the broken system and keep it alive a little bit longer. But the problem still continues. We then blame capitalism and call it a failure. But we never look at the money system itself. We just continue to blame and get angry at whoever the newspapers tell us we should get angry at this week.
So the only way to keep our economy going is for the government to borrow more forever.
That is correct.
So why do the politicians say they are committed to paying off the debt?
They cannot pay it off.
So if they start paying off the debt and spending less, we will move into a depression.
That is correct.
On the other hand, if they continue to borrow, we do not get the depression. But eventually the system will go bankrupt and collapse. But politicians can probably delay it until the next political leader. So to increase debt forever is the better short-term solution? Is that why they bailed out the banks?
That is correct. The bank bailouts were to increase debt and stop money from disappearing. This delayed the depression.
Why doesn't the central bank just give the money to the government debt-free?
Because economists think that it is okay for banks to create money as a debt.
Why?
Because this is what they were told at university. There is another way to pay the interest. We can get some money from the third world.
So how else can we pay the interest?
We can go to third world countries and take some of their money that they have created as debt.
How?
By selling goods to them through exports.
But aren't they already in deep debt?
That is correct.
Why?
Because they copied our money creation system.
What do you mean?
It started with the Bank of England.
Then what?
Then America copied our system.
Then what?
Then everybody copied America.
And now?
The whole world has more debt than money. And we all have to increase debt forever. To pay back the interest that does not exist.
How?
Either ordinary people take on more debt. Or businesses take on more debt. Or the government takes on more debt. Or another country takes on more debt and gives it to us.
But if everybody is in the same situation, how do we win?
We don't.
So the whole world loses.
That is correct.
This is crazy.
That is correct.
What now?
Either the whole system collapses or we change the way we create money.
What do you mean?
I know this guy called Simon Dixon. He is part of a small group of people called monetary reformers. Economists call monetary reformers crackpots. Monetary reformers believe that money should not be created by banks.
Does Simon Dixon and the monetary reformers smoke crack?
No. But economists think that Simon Dixon smokes crack. They think anybody that hangs out in the monetary reform gang must smoke crack. Monetary reformers believe money is too important to be privately created by banks. Economists call that crazy.
What is crazy about that?
Well, the legend says that when money reformers smoke crack, they believe that money should be created debt-free.
But I do not smoke crack, and I think there is nothing crazy about that.
Well, economists think it is crazy, and they will probably think that you smoke crack.
Why?
Because university told them.
How do you create money debt-free without smoking crack?
The person in charge of creating money simply creates it. Then the money is spent into the economy on good things. When the money is spent, it is not asked to be repaid. I have been told that it works best if the person that creates the money does not smoke crack.
Then who creates it?
Well, the government cannot create it.
Why? Do they smoke crack?
No. But they cannot get votes unless they spend more. The public always wants them to spend more in exchange for votes. So they will always create too much. This will cause inflation.
I see. Can the banks create the money?
No. The banks cannot create it.
Why? Do the banks smoke crack?
No. But the banks will always make more profits when they create more money. This will always lead to a financial crisis.
Well, who can create the money?
Somebody needs to create the money independent of the banks and the government.
Who?
Well, a nationalized independent central bank could do it.
But how will you stop the nationalized independent central bank from creating too much money?
Well, if an independent nationalized central bank created money, it would be a lot more simple than the current system and a lot more transparent. It would be very easy to check what they are doing.
What do you mean?
Well, currently we rely on economists to create mathematical formulas that nobody understands. These formulas are used to guide central bankers. Central bankers try to indirectly control how much money banks create by changing the cost of borrowing. It is almost impossible to do, and nobody really understands it.
What is the cost of borrowing?
Interest rates.
Oh. Is that why interest rates go up and down?
Yes. That is central bankers trying to control how much money banks create. They get people to borrow, then send them bankrupt later.
How do they do that?
Well, if we want to stimulate growth, we get more people to borrow.
How?
By keeping interest rates low, it is cheap to borrow.
I see.
Then when people borrow more, banks create more and more money. As more money is created by banks, there is more and more interest to repay. Then prices go up.
So then what?
Well, then we send the people that borrowed the money bankrupt. We do this by increasing interest rates and the cost of repaying their loans.
How does that work?
Well, when central bankers increase interest rates, the cost of people's loans go up, and people can no longer repay. They go bankrupt because they have to repay more than before.
So this stops prices increasing. Is that not called the business cycle?
That is correct. We get people in debt, then send them bankrupt. Economists call this the business cycle. They think this is a natural process.
I see. So if money was created without debt, you would not need to use interest rates to get people in debt and then send them bankrupt.
That is correct.
So why don't we do that?
Because economists think that would be crazy. If we did this, we would all be crackpots.
I think this system is crazy.
I agree.
So how would the nationalized independent central bank create money?
Simple. They would create the amount of money our economy needs to eliminate the business cycle. This will be done transparently, without the need to manipulate interest rates.
Then what?
They would give any money needed to eliminate the business cycle to the government to spend debt-free. We also make it illegal for banks to create money. We did this in the past, last time we reformed money. It is nothing new.
Does this mean the end of the financial markets and banks?
Of course not. That would be crazy. It just means we stop subsidizing banks, and they stop profiting from creating our nation's money. This will allow the financial markets and banks to be much more stable. There is a genuine need for the financial markets and for banks to lend real debt-free money.
I see. How would the government spend the debt-free money?
The public would vote through democracy, like we do now. This is no radical change in politics. It just makes the money system work.
So the government would get the money they need without taking on debt?
That is correct.
And we would not need to get people in debt and send them bankrupt by manipulating interest rates?
That is correct.
And government would not be allowed to create money to get votes.
That is correct.
And banks would not be allowed to create money?
That is correct.
And the crackpots would rule the world?
No. Simon Dixon and the monetary reformers are just interested in creating a banking and monetary system that works. They do not want to rule the world.
How do we make monetary reform happen?
Over the years there have been plenty of proposals on how to do this without major disruption to the financial markets.
Why don't we do it then?
Because economists think it is crazy. So they don't teach it at university. They would have to admit that Simon Dixon and the monetary reformers are not actually smoking crack. Only then can we start making progress before the system collapses altogether.
I think economists are crazy.
I do too.
What now?
We either wait for the entire system to collapse, or we reform the way we create money.
How do we let the government know?
We have to get the economists to stop thinking Simon Dixon and the monetary reformers are smoking crack.
Let's do it. Where can I start?
By showing the economists that money is important to economics and they should take a look. I think somebody is filming us. Perhaps we should forward the recording of this conversation on to them.
Okay, I will tell my professor.
Good luck.
I will try to get the video and upload it to www.simondixon.org. And you can forward the recording to them.
Great.